Scott Detrow, thank you for joining us here in Rome.
Great to be with you guys again. It's good to be here.
I think this is third time on the show with Ashley and I. We've done now New York, Washington, D.C., and now Rome. So
we're collecting them all.
Yes, we are. So you just got here a couple days ago. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
What are you hearing on the ground?
I've got a good sense who the next pope is going to be. I'm pretty confident in it,
Yeah.
and we're going to keep that to ourselves for now.
Yeah,
it's funny. I keep forgetting what day it is. I don't know if you have the same experience.
For
sure. 100%.
Because we're just like reporting and running around, and then like we get our material, and then I'm suddenly mentally on East Coast time trying to like file a story for our show, and then I'm like, wait, what? Oh no, it's 8 p.m. It's not 2 p.m. You know, and then like it's just like a constant on to the next thing. But yes, I believe I've been here for 4 or 5 days at this point. We got in on Friday. We did Weekend All Things Considered from Rome this past weekend, and now I'm starting to think about how I'm going to cover the conclave.
Yeah, and I know you've done something I haven't had the chance to do yet, which is visit St. Mary Major, where Pope Francis is buried. What was that like? What did you hear from people who were visiting the tomb?
It was a really nice personal experience, which I can talk about later. But reporting, we realized like, okay, this will be exactly 1 week since he was buried here. That seems like a good place to talk to people. It seems like a way that we could do at this point in the news cycle. So much is looking forward to the next pope, and I thought like that would be an opportunity to center a story talking about Pope Francis and what he meant to people. So it's an interesting reporting experience. Because for a while, I'm just kind of standing there listening for people speaking English who I can interview, which actually felt like incredibly intrusive. I didn't realize how much it would be beforehand. And then I sidle up like, I couldn't help it seeming like you're from America. I'm with NPR. Can we talk? But we had some really great interviews with this whole range of people who, you know, just happened to be on vacation here anyway, people who wanted to seek out Pope Francis, people who wanted to come because of the Jubilee site. And then especially the day before I had gone to, when we got here, we went into St. Peter's Basilica, and you see all of these different papal tombs and all of the different levels of ornate Baroqueness to them. Yeah. And I think in order to see that first and then see the way that his tomb really is so simple and straightforward, I think that was very moving to see them in that order. So, yeah, it was a really nice story, and there was also a fun like audio journalism moment that we're standing in there, and every few minutes, somebody would come over the PA system and just go, shh. So I was like, I need to make sure I get that in the story.
Oh yeah, for sure. Now you are one of, I think, the like 4,000 or 5,000 journalists that has descended upon Rome. Why do you think there's so much interest from the entire world in a process like this?
I think there's always going to be, no matter what the circumstances, interest in a conclave. You know, this massive, centuries-old global organization who elects its leader in this intricate way that happens to be under a ceiling painted by Michelangelo, right? But I think the way that Pope Francis was such an iconic global figure in the religious world, in the political world, in the secular world, I think that obviously brings to the attention. We were talking about this. I think the movie Conclave honestly is adding more attention to this process for people who might not otherwise be invested in it.
Even with my own friends, people are like, I tell them I'm coming to Rome to cover the conclave, and they're like, oh, I saw the movie. I kind of know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and I said, I haven't seen Stanley Tucci yet, but I've got my eyes peeled.
Yeah, we interviewed the author of the book Conclave, and we thought, like, no, that actually does make a lot of sense to add to our coverage plan, because that is the first thought of so many people who are listening to our coverage of this.
Yeah, which includes a lot of non-Catholics. So I'm curious, as a reporter, how you approach translating this very, what can be, you know, complicated and mysterious and full of jargon kind of institution to a broader secular audience.
It is something I'm thinking a lot about. Obviously, covering this for NPR is very different than covering this for America Magazine. And I think the one thing I'm constantly thinking about is, are we doing enough to explain to our audience why this matters to non-Catholics, why this matters to people who aren't deeply religious or invested in this? And I think like I'm trying to talk to people, and I'm trying to frame stories about like the Pope can be a global figure. He can affect international politics. He's speaking from this central place of moral authority that not that many other people in the world can have. So I think like that is an important beat in our coverage in terms of the experts we're talking to, the people we seek out. And I think also like I listened this morning to you all talk about the synod process for a half hour or so. that gets boiled down to like 3 or 4 sentences in an NPR story. More inclusive, more lay people from around the world. It was controversial. Like there's just not much space beyond something like that for some of these intricate church details, even if they're really important.
Are you seen as authority in your own team on sort of Catholic trivia?
I think I'm bringing a lot of Catholic education and Catholic life experience to this assignment. I think we do have a really great religion team that we've actually bulked up in the last few years. So NPR has a lot of people here actually, because All Things Considered is broadcasting all week from here. So we've got producers with me and editors with me. Then we have a religion correspondent, a religion editor, and our Rome correspondent here as well. So there's a lot of, and we have the iconic NPR Silvia Poggioli, who has covered the Vatican for years and years, and is just like, it's so exciting for me to like be sitting at a table working with her, because like I've gotten to know so many people at NPR over the years. I've been there for a decade. But the international reporters still keep that like mystique as a listener growing up. So to be sitting there like, hey, Silvia Poggioli, help me translate this Italian, is just like a wild experience. So, I mean, she's able to bring the perspective of this is how John Paul communicated it. This is how Benedict communicated. Francis changed things this way. This is what we should be thinking about with whoever this new person is.
Well, we've seen, you mentioned having a large team here. In general, there's been a trend of less religion reporters. So maybe that means it's one beat within a much larger profile. Is that the case? And I don't know, did people do a crash course in Catholicism before heading over?
I think the fact that Pope Francis was sick for so long really helped a lot of people think about how they wanted to cover this moment and put plans in place and start prepping. And I think we were able to benefit from that, because I think from mid-February on, we were all thinking of like, okay, what kind of stories do we want to run? What kind of people do we want to talk to? What kind of plan do we want to have in place? And I think that helped a lot in terms of us being pretty prepared to go into this. And I think like, sure, there's some people who were like, is it Camberlingo? Is it Kimberlingo? Stuff like that.
I was one of those people. Yeah. So
there's a lot of words that I've just read for years, and now I'm having to say out loud. And then I'm like, is it Logia? Is it Logia? I don't actually know. I need to know by Wednesday.
Yeah. You've covered a lot of U.S. politics, international politics, maybe looking at the U.S. angle. I'm curious how this compares in terms of covering maybe their presidential campaign. A lot shorter campaign period.
That's true. Certainly. That's true. And a lot more off screen, like at a certain point, you're just like, well, like we can see the results coming in live time when we're covering a primary or an election. Actually, I was covering Cardinal Dolan yesterday, and I was thinking a lot about how similar this is to covering politics, because he said mass in his titular church, and then he came out afterwards, and there were like 25 reporters lurking outside, and we all respectfully waited till he was done greeting parishioners, but then we all rushed him. And I was just like, this is exactly like covering Capitol Hill, because there's swarms of reporters. I'm like, in between somebody's armpit and somebody's elbow trying to stick my microphone. And we're all yelling, how do you respond to this Donald Trump tweet? And I was like, this could be a hallway in Capitol Hill.
Will you contextualize that just for listeners who might be hiding under a rock? Which Donald Trump tweet?
Sure. This particular, I guess they're now truths. So I just say social media post.
Sure.
He posted an AI photograph, an AI image of Trump as the Pope. So I think at this point in the process, I kind of run through a filter of how much does this Donald Trump social media post need to enter into our real life coverage. But it was getting a lot of attention. Cardinal Dolan is somebody who is close to President Trump. He was just appointed to a Religious Liberty Council.
And who Donald Trump said when asked, who do you think should be Pope? He's like, well, the guy from New York is a pretty good one.
Right. So it did feel like, okay, this is a person who it makes sense to get a response to this too. Dolan did not want to engage in that at all. He kind of stonewalled all of the questions. It seems like at another point that morning, getting into a car, he said the post wasn't good. But it was just like the same beats and the same dynamics of all those reporters fighting for quotes. And then I was also thinking like, okay, that particular newsy nugget is not actually important to the story I'm trying to do. So what's like a broader question I can get in? So I yelled a question. Like, it was really funny. Like, he could vaguely see my eyes through like 4 people's bodies as I like leaned down to make eye contact, just asking, you've been through this before once. How much does that help you? How does that affect how you're approaching this the second time around? he said he's a lot less nervous this time.
That makes sense. It is interesting. I was on my run this morning, and all the cardinals go in on sort of one side of Vatican City where they enter for their general congregation meetings. And there are swarms of journalists there to the point where cardinals like can barely walk into. There's like this moving circle that happens. It's an incredible sight to see. And I wonder, like, how much content can you really get out of those moments?
Depends what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, I think, again, that's something that's very much like covering Congress, because like the caucuses, all the Senate Republicans or the House Democrats will all go into a big meeting and meet behind closed doors. And then like dozens and dozens of reporters will kind of cluster on the outside and make them weave through this gauntlet of us as we're all trying to get questions. And different people are covering different things, right? If you're like the Reuters or the AP Vatican beat reporter, you want every single minute detail. If you're somebody like me, you're trying to like get somebody to commit to a longer interview or just give like a sense of the overall story. I feel like I've seen some eye rolling at the way that reporters have been surrounding cardinals to yell questions. But is that the best way to report? Sometimes no, but if it's the only way you can get in person to get a question asked, like, yeah, it does make sense to stand outside and stick your microphone in somebody's face.
Well, from the point of view of journalists, I can see a lot of parallels to covering a presidential election or Congress. But for the Cardinals, they don't want it to seem like that at all.
Sure.
For them to seem like they're campaigning and making their case in the media is a taboo. So that kind of makes your job very hard.
Yeah. Yeah, when I'm covering an election, nobody says, well, I'm just going to wait to see how the Holy Spirit moves me. You know? Well, I'm sure some people do, but usually not the people running for office that we're trying to talk to. And they're also much more overt about saying that they're running for office.
Yeah.
You know?
We're 10 years removed from Pope Francis speaking on the floor of Congress.
Yeah.
I wonder how you're thinking about how the election of the new Pope might land in our current political climate back home.
Yeah. Who was it? Oh, Sylvia Poggioli made this point. And she said, it's really remarkable that we are in a moment where the head of the Catholic Church was this global figure upholding liberal values. Like that just is not, that is wildly out of sync with the history of the Catholic Church, but he was the one pushing back on global authoritarianism, global anti-immigrant sentiments that we are seeing rise up in country after country. And that's when, again, going back to like, how am I telling the story for people who aren't Catholic and aren't as religiously invested? Like, I do think like, what will this new person prioritize? Will he use this platform to engage directly in politics, or will he focus more on the religious side? You know, I think like the fact that one of the last concrete things that Pope Francis did was write that letter to the Catholic American bishops that was so critical of J.D. Vance. Open question of what the next person chooses to do on fronts like that. Will they be as direct? Will they have different priorities? Like that is something that I'm asking people what they're thinking of, and kind of trying to get a sense of how much that matters. Like how much did Francis influence these big global conversations? And I think he did to a great deal.
Sticking with Pope Francis, I'm curious what influence he had on a more personal level for you as a Catholic and a reporter.
A lot. I was surprised and not surprised how emotional I got the other day seeing his tomb. I was in professional mode going in, and I was recording myself, trying to be very discreet about it to not get yelled at, but I was kind of recording myself to try and give listeners a sense of what it looked like. So I had like a small recorder and I had my notebook up, and I was like, okay, here's what the tomb looks like. Here's where we are. And then as soon as I was done taping that, I got like really, really emotional, and I had to like give myself a few minutes. And then it was actually really nice. A mass had just happened to start in the chapel right by who's buried that he spent so much time praying in. And I just like told my coworkers, like, I'll be back in a half hour. And I just sat through it and just thought about it. I mean, he was somebody who meant a great deal to me. I think at the time he was elected, I was in my late 20s. And it was like a period that I was very not sure whether I still considered myself Catholic. And I was very feeling not sure what direction to go on religion, and feeling alienated by aspects of the church. And I remember thinking like it was a period where I was like Googling different religions, just kind of not that seriously, but I just felt very adrift from this religion I had grown up and had been an important part of my life. And I remember thinking like, well, we'll see who they pick next, and like we'll see how this shapes my decision. And I remember watching the TV and just like praying to myself, like, I really hope this is the right person. And just instantly being drawn by the magnetism of those initial gestures and the way that he focused on like the church as a field hospital aspect and immediately just like getting out, interacting with people in these highly symbolic and really powerful ways. And it was a long process, but that started to pull me back. I started going to church more and more again. And then I think even more powerfully, there was a point where I was like attending mass and I was like, well, he's making it very clear that that's not actually the point of this, that you have to like go out and actively help people and get out into the world. What am I doing on that front? And like kind of over time pushing myself to do more and more of that. So I think like as an adult, you learn that anyone you look up to is actually like a very flawed person and you're bound to be disappointed by the people that you're inspired by when you're younger. But I feel like I don't think any other person as mature adult on my end has ever like I've been that moved by and that inspired by. So I was, very personally upset when he died. I was appreciative of how he handled the papacy. And I think like he did make me a lot more of a religious person than I had been at the point that he started his papacy. And that meant a lot to me.
It sounds like the 2013 conclave was sort of like a referendum for you on your own faith, right? Like depending.
I don't know if it was top of mind for the people in there, but for me personally, I thought like, okay, this is a pivot point and I'm going to pay attention to the signs that are given.
Now, I wonder, there's probably people like that right now who are watching this conclave, sort of deciding whether they want to have a foot in or a foot out or 2 feet in and 2 feet out. I'm curious, now that you've kind of gotten back in the game, what might you say to either a younger version of yourself or someone who's thinking about either committing or leaving?
I think you actually... I don't know when this is going to run. By the time we're taping, you had an article that came out in one of the newsletters this morning that like the Pope is not actually the point of this. And I do think that's important. Like I think like what's going on in your life at your local level, what you choose to engage with and read and absorb like is the most important thing, But I think, I don't know.
Well, no, I think there are people who, just have a similar experience for you. And part of me is like worries for them. It's like, oh, if we don't get Francis II, does that mean this 12-year experiment with returning to the church is going to be over?
Yeah, I just remember being very open-minded and just kind of like making a point to like see what I see and observe what I observe and just kind of like take in the signs that I was seeing around me, And I think like that's a good approach to any kind of point like this. And things don't go hard one way or another, right? There's still like that gray ambiguity about everything, whether it's American politics, whether it's who the next pope is, whether it's the news in the world right around. Like I feel like I know a lot of people who are very, very despairing of whatever's happening in the world, very encouraged at the same time. And it's like a lot of things even out and are not as cut and dry as we talk about it on social media.
No, you get reminded of that in a city like Rome, around a bunch of ruins and, this church that's been here for couple thousand years. Yeah. So it's a long game, I would say.
Yeah.
Scott Detrow, thank you so much. When our listeners are done catching up on all the America coverage, they can find you on All Things Considered live from Rome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Scott.